Bonjour and welcome to our panelists. The webinar will be in English, and you'll be able to see on the bottom of the screen a button on which you can click to choose the right language. The chat icon is for remarks and information. The bios of the speakers will appear there as well. For questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A icon. We'll try to answer as many as possible. My name is Chantal Chidla-Komagata. I'm the coordinator of the Universal Peace Federation for Europe, and it's a pleasure to greet you in this webinar of the International Association of Academicians for Peace on the topic Toward a Northeast Asian Economic Community. What can be learned from the history of the European Union? This is the last webinar of the International Leadership Conference 2021 before a short closing, which will take place right after this session. The founders of the Universal Peace Federation have always emphasized that world peace cannot be accomplished by human efforts alone. Thus, guided by God, they have undertaken innumerous actions towards the reunification of the Korean Peninsula and the establishment of one harmonious family of humankind. To contribute to that aim, Europe has an essential role to play and can show some good practices, as its many nations have been able to come together and cooperate after decades of wars, ideological barriers, and enmity. Throughout the 8 previous sessions, dozens of experts of various fields have spoken and touched thousands of viewers. And today, we will hear from 3 prominent speakers. First, Honorable Hennicot-Schoepges, former president of the parliament in Luxembourg. Then Mr. Isomura, senior fellow Hudson Institute, Washington, D.C., but living now in Japan because of the COVID. And Dr. Petrovsky, chief researcher, Russian Academy of Sciences. Each will give a 10-minute presentation followed by a question. After answering the questions from the public and holding a 10-minute panel discussion, they will give their short final key point. Mr. Yamazaki, coordinator of IAAP Europe and Middle East, will then share his concluding remarks. Now let me introduce our moderator, Dr. Niklas Swanström from Sweden. He is the director of the Institute for Security and Development Policy in Stockholm and one of its co-founders. Within his main areas of expertise, we find conflict prevention and management, Chinese foreign policy and security in Northeast Asia, and of course, the Korean Peninsula, which he has often visited. So, Dr. Swanström, the floor is yours.
Sorry about, I do not have corona, it's just a normal cold. Dear Chantal, thanks for this very kind introduction. It's a great pleasure being the moderator of this session towards the Northeast Asian Economic Community. What can be learned from the history of the European Union? First, I would like to extend my congratulations to the organizers for arranging this wonderful, important event. I've been asked to say a few words before starting and sharing my view on the topic. I do think there is some important lessons that could be learned from the European experience. Still, I don't think we should exaggerate it. In some aspects, they're very far from each other. And we just have to accept that Northeast Asia is a unique region, as well as Europe is a unique region, and any other region. I think it's important to realize that lessons learned is good, but it's also differences that I don't think we really can bridge. I think one of the things that is very similar to Northeast Asia and Europe is that nothing happens in a regional bubble. The situation is very much colored and affected by international factors, such as the Cold War 1.0 that happened in Europe, and a possible Cold War 2.0 between China and United States. Sometimes I get the impression that we talk about regions like they're impregnated from great power competition and power politics. And I don't think this is true anywhere, not least in Northeast Asia today and in Europe during the Cold War. I think the US support of the European Economic Community was essential for the transformation of Europe after the war and unification of Germany later on. But still, maybe more important was the ending of the Cold War. That gave, we had a Russia that's no longer feared a unified Germany or was able to prevent it. So those international factors do play in and matters enormously. And I think this is the challenge in Northeast Asia today. China and the United States is increasingly locked into long-term conflict escalation. It doesn't look favorable. And I think that will effectively prevent a more effective regional mechanism in Northeast Asia. And I know some of the speakers will speak about this, and I'm gladly proven wrong, because we do all want to see something more peaceful and prosperous. So what we're looking at here is that cooperation is necessary. But realistically, I think the community in Northeast Asia will have to focus on low-hanging fruit that will be acceptable to the international community, internationally, and in the two Koreas. And here I can speak for length about North Korea. I don't think North Korea is ready to engage internationally and yet. They're vigorously nationalistic, and they need an assurance that their way of existence is guaranteed, at least today. So what we need to do is to find that. But in 1944, who believed the European Union would unite? So I think maybe, we will be surprised about Northeast Asia as well. Maybe we will find out regional structures. But you didn't really log in to listen to me. I will try to give the upcoming speakers the right credit. First, we have Honorable Erna Hennicot-Schoepges, former President of the Parliament, Luxembourg. After a career as a concert pianist and professor at the Luxembourg Conservatory, she stepped into politics. She became actually the first female president of the Luxembourg Parliament and held several government portfolios, including culture, religious education, and higher education, research, and public works. As a member of the European Parliament, she was appointed rapporteur to the European Parliament on the European Year of Intercultural Dialogue in 2008. She also funded the University of Luxembourg, who is currently a member of the board of the Center of Contemporary and Digital History. She's also vice president of IDEA, so that's a Swedish connection, and of the Chamber of Commerce, and a member of the Sunhack Peace Prize Committee. Honorable Hennicot-Schoepges, I will give you the floor now, and thank you for participating.
Thank you so much for your introduction. And speaking about Europe now, I must say with all humility, for what we achieved, it is only a very, very small part of peace on the European continent, as we are only 27 member states, excluding the Great Russian Federation and many others. And we are not so much at the end of this process. So allow me to be a bit technical and to have some history, some figures to outline how it came to what we are today, a market that is acting also on the global. And to the introduction of Mr. Gerström, I would add, I think the world is changing very much after this pandemic, as it has become global with the facilities we have technically. That means also that the challenges are much deeper and will be concerning many more the individual people. So let's start about Europe. So still the European Union is learning by doing, as it's not finished. It started after the World War, and it was not years of war in Europe, it were centuries. During 5 centuries, Europe was at war all the time, one country versus the other, and afterwards the empires. It started after the Second World War in 1949 with the Treaty of London that established a Council of Europe with today 47 member states of European countries with a parliamentary assembly. And it was also the date of the Human Rights Convention. And the Human Rights Convention is in fact initiating the rights of the individual, establishing a European Court of Justice with this Council of Europe. Then came the 9th of May, 1950. It will be the month of this festive day, and in Europe we call it La Saint-Schumann, as it's a day when Robert Schuman had his famous speech in Luxembourg, and he proposed the idea to reunite together the European steel companies. First, those between Germany and France, and this idea was to have an overview of what they were producing. That is to say, to prohibit that they were producing armaments again, and to have it as a common body rule. He called it the High Authority for Coal and Steel. Out of this High Authority of Coal and Steel, that was a treaty signed in 1951, came a common market established by the first 6 member states that were Germany, France, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy. Schuman's idea was as well to have a common defense policy, but this common defense policy was not successful, as in 1954, the French Parliament rejected this idea. What was the outcome was finally the market. And I think in the whole political situation worldwide, we have to consider the economy and the behaving of the economic leaders as important as of the political leaders. In fact, economy is ruling this world. So the first treaty on the level of politics was a Treaty of Rome, 1957, establishing all the rules. What were the rules? The rules were, first of all, the rules for the market. First of all, abolishing customs tax between member states, establishing common taxes on external borders for the economy, establishing a common agricultural policy, establishing a common social fund, and establishing a European investment bank. So that were very important realizations, and they had the ambition to create research and to have it first in the nuclear by creating Euratom. This enabled to have in Germany the famous Wirtschaftswunder in the 60s, and the economy was booming in the European countries. And that was, of course, having the question, how shall we deal with the monetary question. As for the economy, the monetary question between the member states was a real challenge. And so they had charged our Prime Minister and Finance Minister Pierre Erna to investigate about this and to create a system to prohibit the devaluation of local tax, local money, and to have a procedure of against the volatility of the currency exchange rates. And there was established a European monetary system in 1979 to handle the currencies, as in former economies, a depreciation of a currency that was also always destabilizing the market. So to handle these currencies, we had a common system, a monetary system, and of course the ambition was to have also the common currency. As there were many years in between, 97 the monetary system, and the euro came in 99, but the decision was taken in forefront as there was no agreement between Germany and France, as both countries had a very big difference in their economic situation. And history says it was a compromise between the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and the French President François Mitterrand to have the common currency, the euro, introduced, and in reverse to permit the German reunification between West Germany and the communist-occupied German Democratic Republic. And that was the compromise to have afterwards the common money for all the Europeans. So you see, it's all about compromise, all about links between persons, all about the will to have things done. So now with the money, the common money, the euro came in 99, and this was a success for the European market, as well as all the structures established before. But there are still other problems that had to be solved, as the European Union is a union of 26, 27 members, and the accession was slow, as we started with 6 member states, and in 1973 there was Ireland, Denmark, and UK joining. In 1981, Greece coming out of a dictatorship. 1983, Spain and Portugal, again, Spain after many wars. And in 2004, we had the enlargement by 10 member states. But amid these 10 member states, there were those who were occupied by the former Soviets. This took a lot of time, and there was the question, first question, how shall we deal with common borders? As we had in the treaties fixed that borders within the member states were open, so we had to find agreements, what are the outside borders? And the outside borders of the Union, it was never a challenge until there was a problem with many refugees coming and we had some structures established to help the member states who were on the outside borders, such as the Frontex. And Frontex was an agency that should control the outside borders to prohibit illegal immigration. But Frontex was very poorly equipped. And I must say, my colleague Jean-Claude Juncker, when he was president of...
Madame, please
yes?
mind the time.
I mind the time. So I am talking about the borders. So here the common borders guarded by the agencies of Frontex. And this to say that the European Union is today functioning. It is not without conflicts, and ongoing questions are to be settled. So we hope to be able to stay in peace and to have the further enlargements as Albania. We would so much be glad to have the possibility to have them within us. So I finish here. I thank you. I think there's much to say about our common culture and about the identity. And my final say would be Europe could happen because there was a respect for each one and each one's personal cultural identity. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Madame. Just a very, very quick question here. What do you think about external factors? You spoke very elegantly about how Europe managed to deal with this. What do you think the role of the Soviet Union as an external threat, or United States as a pressure point, how did that affect what has to be seen as a very successful case of European integration? Was that important, or do you think it was mainly internal factors?
No, it is very important. The weakness of the European Union is that we cannot speak so much with one voice for external policy. And of course, we are linked to the US. We are grateful to the US. We are members of NATO. And we are strongly hoping that NATO is keeping its predominance in the military sense. But for me personally, I think we should stop creating weapons, and we should stop thinking about next aggression wars, and we should see the world globally. We have instruments to have it globally, to have the connections globally, but for the European Union, it's a real challenge to keep these policies together, as some on the borders like Hungary is a bit stepping out and turning towards the Soviet Union. And well, the principle of the European Union is democracy. And that's the first goal to achieve.
Thank you very much. Very enlightening discussion. I think we have another very enlightening discussion now with Mr. Jun Isomura-san. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, Washington, D.C., United States. Mr. Isomura is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute since 2005 and is specialized in East Asia and the Pacific, defense strategy, Russia, and the DPRK. He was a staff member to the late Shintaro Abe, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Secretary General of the Liberal Party. Mr. Isomura has arranged meeting between Abe and the Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev in 1990. He advised and supported RK President Rotaewo's first meeting with Gorbachev in San Francisco in 1990. And then he's been organized tabletop exercises between the United States, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan in 2019 and 2020. Mr. Isomura-san, the floor is yours. I'm looking very much forward to listen to your insights.
Thank you very much. I'm Jun Isomura. The UPF webinar March 26 on prospect for successful peace settlement on Korean Peninsula. I proposed establishing the Northeast Asia Economic Zone. It is another word of the Organization of Northeast Asia Economic Cooperation. It is already started to study in Washington, D.C., including US government. The definition of Northeast Asia is China, Russia, Mongolia, both Koreas, Japan, Taiwan, and the United States. At the beginning, I would like to make clear the situation of Korean Peninsula today. The Korean Peninsula is still in time of war, technically, by the Armistice Agreement in 1953. The agreement was signed by UN Command. What the US Army represented, Chinese Volunteer Army, and DPRK. ROK opposed the armistice and insisted on continuing the war to conquer the North. So ROK is not entitled to participate in any process to turn the armistice agreement into a peace agreement. ROK has no authority to participate in negotiation between the US and DPRK. Under the armistice condition, the US is still the enemy of DPRK today. The UN has as well. Therefore, DPRK believes no obligation to follow the UN sanctions. DPRK pointed they are in time of war without an armistice agreement with South Korea. Even an agreement of end of war between DPRK and the US, including UN command, is signed, it will be not means an end of the war between DPRK and ROK. Our time of war will continue, theoretically. With an end of war agreement between DPRK and the US, the DMZ, this military zone, and other contract in the armistice agreement will be ended. It means there will be no official border between DPRK and ROK, and it will be able to restart a war. And the US will be unable to support ROK because of the end of the war agreement with DPRK. Before talking about unification, South Korea should solve this condition by itself. Otherwise, ROK will be just like a clownish dancer alone in the dream. Unification itself will not be guaranteed stability and peace of the peninsula. It can be stability in separation and tension and instability in unite. Northeast Asia today, the situation of Northeast Asia is more than just Cold War today, quite similar to before World War II. There are three military and political superpowers are the US, China, and Russia. Also three economic powers are the US, China, and Japan in Northeast Asia. There are several critical and urgent issues are the Taiwan issue, Chinese vessels invading Japanese territory around the Senkaku Islands, the Korean Peninsula issue, and the Northern Territory issue between Japan and Russia. However, there are not any regional institutions for keeping order, stability, security, and development, increasing mutual distrust of each other and tensions. All countries in Northeast Asia has not much intention to the regional cooperation. China is expanding its economy, military absolutism, and expansionism rapidly with the One Belt, One Road initiative. Chinese economy and industry are conquering significant market in the world. Chinese expansionism will damage the original and historical order, value, and the manners of the world. There is concern that China will be unable to keep its expansionism forever. They want to keep those expansions for maintaining their internal politics. The one country, two systems means the Chinese Communist Party and two systems under them. The People's Republic of China is just one of CCP's administrative organs. The CCP is the country. Therefore, people and CCP are in hostile relations historically. For suppressions of people and society, the CCP must keep the expansion of all powers endlessly. However, their history shows they will meet their demise finally. The monster has to keep expanding their surviving, but same time fatal vulnerabilities are growing. I'm afraid that China try to be the absolute rulers as Hitler's Third Reich. It will be the mega impact event as well. Xi Jinping might recognize it and has a sense of terror on it. They will face the collapse of the regime, either continuing expansion or stopping expansion. Additionally, China looks getting out of control with many complicated issues inside and outside of the country. Their responses are getting rough and overbearing. The presence of the US in Asia, so-called Pan-Americana, the United States became the world dominant economic and military power after the Second World War, will change today. What will happen with the ending of Pan-Americana? Without US presence in the Northeast Asia region, the regional condition will be simply back to the same as before World War II. Without US forces in ROK, DPRK will seek to unify the Korean Peninsula by them. The sovereignty of Taiwan will be disappeared. Japan might choose to be a neutral, a nuclear nation. About the Organization of Northeast Asia Economic Cooperation, it is a time to consider establishing an institution for uniting countries in Northeast Asia. The most important key is principle. Without noble principles, those talk will wander. Mongolian Foreign Ministry has held Ulaanbaatar dialogue on Northeast Asia security since 2014. The UN, China, DPRK, Japan, Russia, the US, and ROK participated in the dialogue, and several officials from Europe. It is single opportunity for DPRK to participate. It will be possible to discuss the Organization of Northeast Asia Economic Cooperation at such an occasion. What can be learned from the history of European Union? The unification of Germany was just an accident. Mikhail Gorbachev attended the celebration of the 40th anniversary of the BDR, East Germany, at the Palace of Republic on 7th October 1989. On the day, I saw that in TV news in Moscow with the close advisor to Gorbachev. He told me, Isomura-san, do you know why there are so many vacant seats there? All went out to the West. I recognize that Gorbachev forsakes Honecker. However, West Germany had done a wide variety of preparation toward East Germany and West and East European too. The organization of Northeast Asia cooperation is not just for Korean Peninsula, it is for the region's stability. Finally, comparing between Europe and Northeast Asia, it is little similarity. There is not a core country with mixed trust and distrust. However, substantial European effort from the Pan-European Union in 1923 until establishing the EU are good teachers. There were exceptional works based on the delicate, confident, inflexible, and confident will, especially the grand principle and philosophy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Isomura. As you point out, fantastic. Unfortunately, I think we do agree with each other maybe too much. I wish we would have disagreed more. But one thing that you point out, especially in your paper, very strongly, that the Chinese Communist Party aggressively expands its power, needs to aggressively expand its power to survive at the expense of its people, but also other states. Do you think in such circumstances it is realistic? And if so, how can we create a situation where China accepts to be an equal partner in Northeast Asia? But as you say, I mean, I see the same aggressive China that is expansionist rather than anything else. How would you, how do we bring China into the fold, put it that way?
Actually, it's very hard to image of the future of China, but I studied on China with the Pentagon. That was about 10 years ago, and the scenario was the Chinese CCP will collapse in 2030. And after that, what will happen? China will divide its 7 regions. That will be mega impact event in Asia. So that is what I'm afraid about. The expansion of China is afraid, but also collapse of the CCP is also mega impact event.
Well, thank you very much, Isomura-san, for a very interesting. We have a Russian speaker closer to home from my side, Dr. Vladimir Petrovsky. Dr. Petrovsky is a PhD in political science, a full member of Russian Academy of Military Science, and a senior counsel at the Asian Economic Cooperation Foundation. He's a member of the editorial board of Diplomatic Service, International Journal of Asian Economics, International Journal of World Peace, among others. He's the author of 4 books and numerous articles on the theory of international regimes, multilateral security arrangement in Asia Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic regions, civil-military relations and security sector reform, international peacekeeping, conflict resolution, human security and human development issues. Sounds like my CV, apart from the Russian part. So, Dr. Petrovsky, the floor is yours. I'm looking very much forward to listen to your presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to join this discussion. And as soon as we discuss the role of the European Union and the experience of the EU for the future Northeast Asian Economic Community, I would agree with those of us who argue that the military and political situation in the region of Northeast Asia is quite different from those which we have had in Europe after the Second World War. After all, the whole idea of the European Economic Community was based on the results of the Second World War. And all European countries agreed about the role of Germany in what happened. And they also agreed that they will not make war between each other forever. And that was the very basic result. And that was the very fundamental thing which allowed the European Economic Community to develop. And if we look into the region of Northeast Asia, we'll see that indeed the situation here is more like the Cold War is not ended here. And after all, we see the legacy of the San Francisco Peace Treaty of 1951, which which was not able to put an end to ongoing conflicts and territorial disputes in Northeast Asia. And what we have today? Today we have, again, we have the divided Korea, and we have the whole series of territorial disputes between Russia and Japan, between China and Japan, between China and South Korea, and between Japan and Korea, and including Taiwan, etc., etc. So what it means that I feel the lack of mutual trust in the region of Northeast Asia, which I think would not allow for the countries of Northeast Asia to build the economic community soon. So we'll have to work on that, and it's quite a task for us to achieve. And I hope that the Universal Peace Federation and our IAAP would contribute to establishing and to promoting the culture of peace and reconciliation. But that's the first part of the issue. But the second part, to my mind, is quite an economic issue. If we start to discuss Northeast Asian economic community, we have to understand what it should look like. And to this extent, we should consider not only the European experience, but also the experience of East Asia and Eurasia, for example, because we have the whole series of integration processes in these two respective regions, which could be of interest for us to consider. Let's take negotiations, for example, and all discussion about the Asia-Pacific Free Trade Area, which is ongoing. Then just to mention the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, which happened already last November at the ASEAN Summit in Hanoi, as you remember. And we have Trans-Pacific Partnership, after all, which exists for 4 years already. Now they call it the Enhanced Trans-Pacific Partnership after the United States left this project. So we have to consider what's going on inside all these respective arrangements. And it's quite interesting because, for example, if to take the RCEP, it's quite ambitious. It's going to cover about 32% of the global GDP, maybe, up to the year 2050. And it will cover about more than 2 billion people. So it's quite an important, and our respective countries like China, Japan, and South Korea, at one day found themselves inside the RCEP already. They joined the RCEP. And as you know, these three respective countries, they were discussing the idea of the so-called trilateral free trade area. So now, does it make sense to continue these discussions as soon as they are inside the RCEP already or not? We have to consider this. And again, if to take the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Japan was one of the drivers of this project, and now is actually the leader of the enhanced TTP. So we have to look very close into these integration formats which exist already, how they could affect the future of the Northeast Asian Economic Community. And of course, you know that there is quite a difference between the RCEP and the TTP. So the basic idea of the RCEP is the economic connectivity and facilitation of trade, which makes it very much attractive, basically for all countries, for all economies. While the idea of the TTP is very deep trade liberalization, and not all countries are ready for that as of now. Then we have quite an integration process in my region of Eurasia. We have the so-called the Eurasian Economic Union, which was built and which started its operations in the year 2015. And the EU was the basic model for the Eurasian Integration Union. So we have the 5 countries which belong to the Eurasian Economic Union. Then, as we mentioned before, we have the Chinese initiative of, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is very interesting. And it's not, as you know, the Belt and Road Initiative. And I'm not going to look at in terms of expansion. For me, it's a kind of international economic regime, which means that China proposed the idea of this initiative, and all other countries, they're free to join or not to join. And as you know, some countries of the region, like my country, China and Mongolia, they take part in the implementation of this initiative already. But again, this is not an integration project. It would not be led by China. It's interesting because all participant members, all participant economies, they make their sovereign decisions, but they cooperate because they have the whole set of common principles and rules. And as you know, there is a process of conjunction, so-called conjunction, between the Eurasian integration and the Belt and Road Initiative. Then we have the idea which was proposed by Russia, which is called the Greater Eurasian Partnership. And it's interesting, it's very much interesting because the idea was to connect, to build an interface of connection between the existing integration formats. For example, the idea was to have the interface of dialogue and cooperation between the EU and the European Eurasian Economic Union, between the Eurasian Economic Union and the Belt and Road Initiative, between the Eurasian Economic Union and ASEAN, for example, etc., etc., etc. And the idea is to have an interface between quite different, differently formatted institutions and arrangements. And the economists, they call it the bowl of spaghetti. So the idea is how to mix it together to make it tasty and eatable. So it's quite an interesting in terms of the idea, and it was never tried and practiced before, but I hope maybe it could be useful for the future of the Northeast Asian economic community. Last but not the least, we should look very closely into the cross-border and cross-regional cooperation in Northeast Asia. After all, we're talking about the Europe of the regions. Let's look closer into the Asia, Northeast Asia of the regions. For example, we have the Association of Northeast Asian Regional Administrations and the abbreviation Northeast Asian Regional Governments, and the abbreviation is NEAR, N-E-A-R, very symbolic, which unites 77 regional administrations of all countries of Northeast Asia. And then, of course, we should try to involve North Korea into all these processes. I mean, the processes of economic cooperation. It's not easy, but at least Russia is trying to do that. For example, Russia introduced the so-called trilateral projects between Russia, North Korea, and several Korea, which includes the restoration of Trans-Korean Railway, the building of gas pipeline, which will go through the whole of Korean Peninsula, etc., etc., etc. So these are some very basic considerations about what the future Northeast Asian economic community will look like. But finally, I would say that, to my mind, it will not make sense to build anything to this extent which would be anti-Chinese, or something which would exclude China. It will not work. So it's very difficult, but again, we should try to consider how to make it happen, including China. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Petrovsky. I mean, I have a bit of a skepticism against China currently, with all the pressure it brings into Europe, and especially towards Sweden, where we see a lot of Chinese aggression currently. But I mean, Russia and Sweden also had its challenges, and or the Eastern European. But I would like to see, I mean, the Sino-Russian tension and the Sino-European tension that is growing, or for that matter, the Sino-Japanese tension to the Quad and etc. What do you think Russia's role can be in bridging that tension? And I mean, I think the bowl of spaghetti is problematic because we have a meatball called Ukraine that ended up in the middle of it, that will make it very difficult to deal with it. But how do you see Russia's role in bridging the Sino-United States tension? Is it possible?
Well, I think it's possible both strategically and technically, but I think that China and the United States could try to do it themselves, which means that Russia would not take sides in this very difficult conversation, so to say. And to my mind, the US-Chinese relations are very tense, but I'm not totally pessimistic because after all, China, they propose to re-establish the so-called strategic dialogue mechanism between China and the United States, which existed before under the previous US administrations, which would allow at least to discuss different difficult issues, not to resolve them, but at least to discuss. But on the other side, China feels that Russia, although Russia would not take sides in this polemics between China and the United States, Russia would always be China-friendly country. So what I mean is, it's a kind of positive neutrality. But of course, all of us, including Russia, we want to have the US-Chinese relations more normal and more constructive, because after all, it will be very good for the global economy and for the global political and strategic stability. That's my vision.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to take a few questions from the audience, and we have Miss Melanie Komagata. She holds a bachelor degree in international relations in the University of Geneva and currently doing her master's on East Asian studies at the University of Geneva. She will try to summarize a couple of questions. We're going to apologize immediately. We're not going to be able to answer all questions. But Melanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swanstrom. And also to all the speakers. As a student, I feel very much enriched after hearing all the interventions. And yes, without further ado, I will ask the first two questions to Mrs. Schoepges. So the first one, asked from the participants, is you mentioned that Europe was far from having achieved the desired unity. If Europe invests efforts into the reunification of Korea, how could that bring more cohesion into the European Union?
That's very difficult. I think European foreign policy is shaped by all the attitudes of the 27 member states. And I know there are good connections with Korea. We have many cooperation in research. There are students exchanges, and I think we should improve it on the level of individual citizens, and then have the political structure of the whole of Europe shaping it and helping to make connections. The first to do is to have the connections between the citizens and to open the borders and to leave not citizens one and the other side, but to have them, to help families to reunite and to have this done.
Thank you very much. If I may ask another question to you, it comes from Mrs. Evgenia from Siberia, and she's asking, was the reunification of Germany primarily the desire of the German people, or a push by the European nations? And is it similar to the reunification on the Korean Peninsula?
The difficulty, I agree. But if you look at the history of Europe, there were 20 years of cooperation on the economic before the reunification of Germany. So, in my opinion, economy is moving perhaps easier than the political.
Thank you very much. We now have a question for Mr. Isomura. So the audience asked, you mentioned the importance of principles to contribute to an Asian economic zone. How could Europe contribute to that? And how could the Northeast Asian countries find a common noble principle?
It's a very difficult question. My image is, I'm thinking about the Northeast Asia Economic Zone since 2009, but I think it will take another decades to establish such a organization or cooperation. But we have to start to discuss and to make clear, because just Erna told for instance, Germany unification is, and the US Germany prepared for a long time, 2 decades, for meeting with unification. So in Asia, Northeast Asia, we have to discuss. We have to consider about that. Only I can tell at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now 2 questions to Dr. Petrovsky. First of all, one question from Armenia. It is from Rima, from an association of young philanthropists. And this person is asking, what is better, a multipolar world with wars or a unipolar world in peace?
Well, actually, I would say that one polar world is quite not stable construction. So to my mind, multipolar world is much more balanced and efficient and after all, just. It is more safe. So that's my vision.
Yes, thank you. And one more question is from Nick Bikal. Do other countries really have a choice when the Chinese powerhouse is bulldozing across?
So the question was about the so-called triangle, Russia, China, and the United States? Or?
I think it is more about the Belt and Road Initiative.
Belt and Road. Well, you know, Russia is interested to join, but Russia tries to watch how it's going on. For example, all this initiative is based upon the so-called credit and loans scheme. And Russia is not, Russia would prefer to have the investment rather than loans to join this initiative. And right now, I think that both of our countries, Russia and China, they discuss, they have intergovernmental discussion, and they jointly prepare for the kind of memorandum or agreement between Russia and China, how to proceed with the Belt and Road Initiative. But I think it's to the benefit of Russia to join, because after all, it would help to build infrastructure in the region of Eurasia. And after all, if you look at the Russian map, you'll see that 2/3 of Russia it's like a desert. It's a steppe with ice and permafrost. All territory which is to the east of Ural Mountains, then it needs to be developed. And I hope this Belt and Road Initiative can contribute to this.
Thank you very much. We now have a general question to all the panelists from Dr. Rathore. It is direct negotiations about establishing economic zones in North Korea North Korea should be started without the involvement of the big powers, so China, Russia, and USA. Will that not be a first step towards the confidence building measures and reducing the tensions in the region? I don't know who would like to answer this question. Yes, Mr. Isomura.
The problem is there are many discussions on North Korea, but not participation from North Korea. The important thing is talk with North Koreans directly. That is most important thing. Otherwise, just illusion, image of North Korea. That is my answer, actually.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Petrovsky.
Yes, actually, I think that, of course, there is a possibility of building a kind of free area between two Koreas. But what is absolutely necessary right now, some political steps are to be taken at the United Nations Security Council. What I mean is, as soon as the United Nations Security Council would agree to lift at least part of the sanctions imposed against North Korea, it would become technically possible to build such kind of zone. Right now, it's absolutely impossible. And that's the biggest concern for the North Korea. They would be ready to give up, probably to give up, not immediately, but in some time, their nuclear and missile program, as soon as they would feel that the sanctions are being lifted gradually. And as of now, I know that there is quite a series of proposals on behalf of the government of South Korea and regional governments of the Republic of Korea. They keep in mind many economic projects to involve North Korea, but they cannot implement it just because of these sanctions. So the first move should be a kind of political one.
Thank you very much. We've already passed on the 10 minutes for the Q&A, so I will give back the floor to Mr. Swanstrom. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, this is a good opportunity for also if you want to comment on your co-panelists' presentations. But I would actually like to bring up the DPRK question again. I mean, my own institute, the Institute for Security and Development Policy, we have regularly quite a few North Korean guest researchers. We have several joint projects with North Korea, both bilateral between us and them, but also multilateral between us and them and other partners. There's no limit of their interest. I agree to that. On the other hand, I think DPRK is reluctant to go too far. This is and I would love to hear your views on this, because their economy, compared to Germany, Eastern Germany and Western Germany, was in no way similar financially, economically, but DPRK and RK is worlds apart. So I think the DPRK is not ready, and I do not think they're ready to give up nuclear weapons, simply because they created nuclear weapons to create security for themselves, not as a bargaining chip. And they're probably willing to give up Yongbyon. But how do you view this? How to engage? And I think we have two, Dr. Petrovsky and Isomura-san, who has very clear views here. But the rest, how do you view, how can we engage DPRK in a way that we can create a long-term sustainable process? Because we can engage them, no problem. It goes in circles. Engagement, disengagement, engagement, disengagement. But how do we make a long-term engagement DPRK? Anyone has any comments or insights? I would be delighted to listen. Isomura-san?
Yes, so many discussions of denuclearization of North Korea. But just talking, the denuclearization process, technically, and the real work will take decades. And many technical steps for denuclearization. We have to be clear, and we have to share with DPRK. and also political steps. If DPRK, the nuclearization steps, certain steps, then to make, for instance, the agreement of the peace treaty, and then such kind of the roadmap we need, and at least Trump administration and DPRK share that roadmap. But unfortunately, the changing of the US administration, this disappeared. But we have to make again the sharing the same roadmap between DPRK and the United States. That is my answer.
Vladimir? Yes.
Yes, so I would totally agree with Professor Isomura that we need a roadmap for the denuclearization, but we should be very, very much realistic about the possible future of the implementation of this roadmap. After all, what happened while North Korean leader was meeting Donald Trump several times? Nothing happened just before the United States were not able to suggest something which could be really attractive to the North Korean side. What I mean is the United States, as I understand, they still want to stop North Korean nuclear and missile project immediately. It's like I want to have a toll approach, which is not good for North Korea, because they would really prefer to have step-by-step process, meaning that sanctions should be lifted gradually. Then at a certain point, peace treaty should be signed to end the Korean War. Then probably the United States should be able to diplomatically recognize Pyongyang as a country. And then I would imagine that North Korea would be abandoning this nuclear and missile project step by step. But to be realistic, what is possible now, and I hope the Biden administration would be able to understand this, is that after all, there is such a big concern about North Korean possible nuclear attack on the territory of the United States. Okay, let's deal with the missile program of North Korea first. After all, even if North Koreans have the nuclear bomb, how they should deliver it if they would not have ballistic missiles. So let's concentrate on the strategic missile, ballistic missile program first. Then gradually we should look into how to start denuclearization again, step by step. So to my mind, the biggest concern for North Korea is economy. Just an economy, which is very much complicated now by COVID pandemic, which we also have in North Korea. So what they want, finally, they want to trade their nuclear and missile program in exchange for economic help and recognition. That's all they want. And to this extent, I believe that in the course of the United States and North Korean talks, they should be able to develop realistic and balanced roadmap of how to achieve this.
Yeah.
Madam, yes.
You must not forget the question in Germany. The German people were opening the borders. It was an accident. It was not foreseen by negotiation to have the borders opened. And the economy in the East was so low that the people preferred to leave. And in December 1989, people were on the borders and they just stopped over, and that was a misunderstanding on the technical side. So the people are the ones who can have the politics moved. So I don't know what is the situation in North Korea, but I'm fully admit that those people are looking to the south and having some frustration. They are for sure not all agreeing with their regime.
I think that's very true, but I think it also is a big concern in North Korea to be swallowed by South Korea, but of course by the South Koreans especially the younger generation, to have to pay for this whole unification process, which in Germany is still an issue. You have this what do you call the friendship tax or the brotherhood tax to manage the German unification. And let's be honest, East Germany was an economic miracle in the East. And North Korea are many things, and I'm actually, since I travel there on a frequent basis, there is a certain amount of domestic economic development, and you see signs of local production, but it's a far cry. It's not even close to the South Korean development. So this is going to be a tremendous problem. But I would like to pick, we have a few minutes, 5 minutes of your final words of wisdom. Hopefully also maybe a bit positive, and see how can we learn from the European experience, and how can we create a Northeast Asian economic community. Madame, would you like to start with, try to summarize everything?
Well,
no pressure.
The European experience is a lesson, but the most important lesson is that it has been done step by step, very slowly, and we are not yet at the end, and we have not yet confirmed. It's always, every day, a challenge. So if I could take the situation in North Korea, I don't know what is happening in the north concerning the people, concerning the families. And we have learned that the families cannot cross the borders to join. Perhaps one should start by such an initiative, or by children's experiences. We have in Europe the new generation studying wherever they want in all the member states, the Erasmus program. Such initiatives could perhaps help unblock the political situation, but the political is nevertheless something that makes it happen in the final end. If the people don't move, and in Eastern Germany it started by demonstrations. Each Monday they gathered in the church and they demonstrated, and it was peaceful demonstration guided by a priest and by the conductor, Kurt Masur, who played a very big role to have it peacefully done. That happened during 1 year. So it just not was a check note to have the borders open between the two countries. So we should think of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Isomura-san, do you have any final words?
Yes, actually, the DPR, North Korea, they have no intention to start war with the United States. The nuclear and missile is their tool to negotiate with the United States, Washington. And they want to develop the state-to-state relations with the United States. They want to be recognized as the nation. So in the beginning, Washington has to understand about that. And that is the difficulties. Always I'm thinking between dog and cat. Mm. And the character of North Korea is just like cat. And the United States always, their friend is just dogs. So they cannot understand well about cat. That is my answer.
Well, thank you very much. Professor Petrovsky, any final wisdom?
Yes, actually, I would suggest that as soon as we want to build Northeast Asian economic community, the first step should be for all the participant member states of Northeast Asia to try to develop a set of principles which could be the basis for the common declaration, which just to announce that, okay, we want to build Northeast Asian Economic Community, and we understand that it would be very difficult, but we agree on the following principles. And the key principle should be that the difficult legacy of the Second World War and of the Korean War should not be the obstacle for building such kind of economic community. We, the respective countries, who understand that we cannot resolve all these problems in territorial dispute at once, but we surely agree that that should not be an obstacle for us to move further towards economic community. That's my proposal.
Well, thank you very much. I think it was a positive sort of roundup and trying to sort of look at the very difficult problem in a positive light. As I think many have highlighted, this is not going to be solved tomorrow. This is something that, well, quite few of us might actually never experience even. But even just because it's hard, doesn't mean we shouldn't quit, to paraphrase an American president. We really need to do the best thing we can. But finally, we do have a Mr. Yoshihiro Yamazaki-san. He's the liaison director of the Institute of Peace Policies, a think tank in Tokyo, Japan, for Europe and Middle East. He's the coordinator also for International Association of Academics for Peace for Europe and Middle East. His work as a journalist included 6 years at the Tokyo bureau chief of an American news agency. He's now actually lives in Europe, in Turkey, Istanbul, with his wife. So next door to Sweden, more or less. It's at least closer than to Tokyo. So Yamazaki-san, unfortunately, Yamazaki-san will not take any questions afterwards, but I think his insights will be very valuable regardless. Yamazaki-san, the camera is yours.
Thank you very much for your great contributions to this excellent and fruitful discussion. This particular session has been hosted by the International Association of Academicians for Peace in Europe and the Middle East, in short, IAAP. As its name suggests, IAAP aspires to encourage and engage academicians in contributing to peacemaking causes and efforts with their rational capacity, science, and technology. As Mr. Isomura pointed out, the Northeast Asia involves the three largest economies, America, China, and Japan, as well as the three most militarized nations, America, China, and Russia. In fact, these four powers have been variably responsible for the creation of two independent Koreas, their devastating war, and subsequent division. The two Koreas have taken the sharply contrasting path of nation building, thus they are in a way obliged to settle the ideological struggles themselves now. To complicate the present state of affairs further, the history overshadows these four powers and two Koreas as grudges from the past century persist and even territorial disputes boiling up with Japan, Russia, China, and Korea involved. Hardly an environment to talk about a common community. Indeed, I really salute your guts to talk about this topic today. These questions and many more in Korea and the Northeast Asia do await wisdoms of academicians to untangle them. When we could arrive at innovative principles, policies, and environments that are conducive to Korea's peace and unity, the entire world would receive benefits for more harmonious future. Why I believe so? I may briefly testify this point based on my personal engagements in the Middle East. As a journalist, then as a think tank researcher, I have personally witnessed excruciating sufferings of the peoples and societies in the Middle East. Their unfortunate fates were, in large part, frankly speaking, destined, if not driven by past colonial rulers and big powers, just like Korea under the Japanese rule and during the Cold War under the superpowers. If the Korea's questions could find solutions, therefore, they would surely help many nations and peoples around the world under distress to untangle their own. For that matter, UPF has been trying to elaborate 3 guiding principles towards peaceful, prosperous, and harmonious community of nations. They are interdependence, co-prosperity, and universally shared values. Actually, these have been explicitly advocated by UPF's founders, Dr. Samuel Moon and Mrs. Hak Ja-han Moon, since as far back as 1960s. They anticipated the eventual demise of communism and an ultimate advent of a world guided by these principles. Doesn't the current world, which is plagued by the corona pandemic and all its tragedies, urge the academics world over to convert these principles into applicable policies and technologies? Since 1970s, Dr. Moon and Mrs. Moon have been inviting scholars and scientists, the people like the audience today, to explore value-oriented scientific horizon through a program called International Conference for the Unity of Sciences, or ICOS in short. This year's virtual ICOS conference was held just before this ILC program. Incidentally, in one of the ICOS conferences in 1981, that is exactly 40 years before, Dr. Moon shared his vision of what he called an Asian common community by constructing Great Asia Highway Zone, eventually linking to the Great Free World Highway. Let me quote his remark as follows. This highway would be a great international highway around which freedom is guaranteed through mainland China, the Korean peninsula from north to south, to an underwater tunnel or bridge to Japan, and moving north through the entire Japanese islands. People in Europe may appreciate this vision thanks to the road network built by the Roman Empire that still remains working. Peace indeed is an ideal, and its implementation requires enormous volumes of exploring and sharing of wisdoms, knowledge, and rationale to develop workable policies and their know-hows. You are sincerely invited to this task of the century. Once again, thank you very much for your participation today. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Yamazaki-san. Even if we want a stable Roman network connecting all of us, we don't want the Roman armies marching on them. So I think we also need to find a way to create that peaceful economic integration. And I think Europe has been extremely successful, and I think we do have potential all around the world, and Northeast Asia is one of them. Difficult as it is, we need to build those networks and integration. And we need to build democratic and integrated societies that cares for their own citizens and all that. But I would just like to say a big thank you from me and the panelists to the audience. It's been a very interesting exercise, and I think it's been very useful. And I will hand over to Chantal Kumagata, and she have a few final words. Chantal, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Swanström, for your great moderation. We actually learned so much from you and from the 3 outstanding scholars today. We can understand that there are still many, many hurdles in the process of the reunification of the Korean Peninsula, but we also know that the more we are aware of the problems and the more we can find the solutions to them, as long as we don't give up our vision. So thank you again, and we will now have a short 5-minute break and then continue with the about 30-minute closing session. The official world closing of this ILC 2021 will take place on May 8th. So, but now please stay as long as you can, and thank you very much.